Well, I want to welcome both of you here to CBN News. There's a lot to talk about today. January, you had a very big week being at President Trump's speech before Congress, and we'll get into some of that. But one of the reasons your story has caught so much attention is you have really been, you and your family, at the center of this battle over the transgender issue, particularly when it comes to schools and what has been happening in schools around the country. For those, and I know this is a loaded question, but I want to give you a chance to sort of give a brief explanation of what happened. For those who don't know, where did your journey start on this issue with your daughter?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having us, Billy. This started for my family at the height of COVID in 2020. Our daughter fell prey to the lies of gender identity ideology and that she was born in the wrong body in May of 2020. And so this was shortly after three of her friends at our local middle school had also started suddenly identifying as some form of transgender. And as you are well aware now, there are 72 different identities for these kids to choose from. And, we have short-term memory loss a lot in this country. And you have to recall back in 2020, there was very little known about the social contagion aspects of this issue and truly what had been bubbling under the surface in our schools for many years leading up to this point.
Yeah, and so you started going into this, obviously, like a lot of other families where you're trying to navigate it. It's very difficult, and those families who are going through it now, they know this, where you're trying to figure out, how do I not alienate my daughter while also understand what's going on? It's an influx of information, and you have a resource that we will talk about after to help with this. But going into your story, because right now there are questions. Obviously, you've been out there quite a bit. The president speaking about your journey and your story. It's as though people are trying to sort of poke holes and say, well, she knew this about her daughter. And, let's clarify some of those details, because you've been very open. We've had you on before and you've shared these details with us. When you found out about this and you started interacting with the school, what happened? And at what point were you concerned that the school's response was problematic?
Well, Billy, like so many parents, I trusted the school. I had no reason at that time not to. And in fact, I was volunteer of the year at the school. I was a huge proponent for public schools and teachers. I dedicated hundreds of hours to volunteering in the classroom and each of my children with their teachers. And so what happened is I reached out to a teacher, as I had done many times before, and I disclosed what was happening to our family and with our daughter. And I was letting this teacher know that we were not affirming any kind of false sexual identity and that we had elicited the help of a counselor to help us navigate this. So we did know that our child was struggling, and we were very concerned as her parents because nobody loves and knows their child more than a parent does. So we were handling this as a family. And there are aspects of those emails that I cannot go into because we are still in the litigation process. We are appealing the judge's dismissal to our court case at the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, and we are now awaiting their ruling. But what I can tell you is I didn't hear anything else after I thought what we were discussing was my child using a nickname. That is all. 2 weeks later, my 13-year-old daughter got into the car and told me that she had a meeting at school and they asked her which restroom she wanted to use. I immediately emailed the school counselor because I was very alarmed. Number one, that they had a meeting with my daughter that I was not invited to attend. But number two, why were they asking her which restroom she wanted to use? Again, no one knew about these formal transgender transition plans that we later found out they had created with my daughter behind closed doors with three adults that consisted of the school counselor, the assistant principal, and a social worker I had never met, Billy. And so, people can go back and watch the previous interview that you and I did because I go into more depth. But what I can tell you is it took many weeks when the guidance counselor called me back that same day I had emailed her with the assistant principal. They initially told me they could not give me any information about the secret meeting they held with my daughter. They told me my daughter had to be the one to consent to giving me any information. So, that's really what propelled us down this pathway. And when we finally got an in-person meeting with the principal, the first 9 weeks had ended. That's how long it took us to get a meeting. And that is where the first time we were shown this formal support plan is what they call it, but it's anything but. It's a transition support plan that they had completed with our daughter without our knowledge or consent. And this went well beyond the nickname. They asked her which restroom and locker room she preferred to use, which sex she preferred to room with on overnight field trips. And they put the burden of whether or not the parent will be notified or even aware that these type of secret social transitions occur, because they asked the child, how should we refer to you when speaking to your parent? Should we use your birth name and pronouns or your preferred name and pronouns? And these type of gender support plans, Billy, are being used all over our country. There are still 21,000 school districts, according to Parents Defending Education, that have these secret transition policies. And so anyone can go look at these plans. It's from an organization called Gender Spectrum. They are available online for you to view. But I can't tell you how angry I was, because I have always told my children, my number one job is to keep you safe. And when they interfered with our ability to parent our child and met with her behind our backs and did this formal transition plan, they took my ability to keep my daughter safe completely away from me. And that plan created a huge wedge between us and our daughter. And it sent her a very clear message that not only was our authority no longer wanted or needed, but that she needed to be protected from us, not by us. Our daughter was celebrated, Billy, for this identity, for this denial of her sex. And she wanted to cut her breast off. How sick is that? That she's celebrated for this self-loathing that she was experiencing.
You know, I mean, as you're talking about this, and I want to get a quick reaction from you, and then I want to come to you, Bernadette, on this. Right now, because again, you were out there, at Trump's speech, and he mentioned your story, as many other politicians have, because it's a big deal. This is a story that, for a lot of reasons, I think sparks interest. When you see some of the reactions, these sort of fact checks that are coming out, trying to sort of pull through some of these details, which again, in that last interview we did, you spoke about these elements. When I've interviewed you, I've only heard you speak about these things. So there was nothing in these fact checks that were surprising to me, because I'd heard the story. What is it like to sort of be in a place where that sort of thing is going on, where you're being fact checked?
Billy, to me, it's just noise, because I have always told the truth from day one. We have documentation to back up everything that I have ever said. And the bottom line is, our case was not an isolated case. So perhaps people get confused when they hear me talk about other parents who were in the dark. In our situation, I have always said and been very clear that we knew our daughter was struggling. There have been absolutely cases where parents were the only ones kept in the dark about these secret social transitions. Everybody at the school knew that child was struggling, oftentimes with co-occurring issues, like anxiety, depression, but they hid this information from parents, and that child sometimes was living a double life for years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and Billy, I can jump in on that, because I was just quickly looking at an amicus brief we're filing on Monday in the Supreme Court of the United States, and I was just going to count up the number of parents of stories. I believe there are about 8 or 9 parents in this amicus brief that we're filing with the Supreme Court that describes a modus operandi, a pattern of what exactly happened to the Littlejohn's daughter, over and over. And this is across the country. And in addition to these, we as an organization, Child and Parental Rights Campaign, this is our sole focus. We talk to parents all over the country. We have 5 other federal lawsuits right now. So between the amicus parents that we're in this amicus brief and our lawsuits, these are parents from Colorado, California, Massachusetts, um, other parts of Florida, Wyoming, Pennsylvania. Frankly, I lose track. They're literally all over the country. And what's striking is the similarity of the pattern of how the school official, how this ideology comes into the school. Organizations like GLESSN and Gender Spectrum. GLESSN has chapters in 30 states. They're in schools in 30 states. Gender Spectrum has a toolkit that they have provided to schools all over the country, and that toolkit, quote unquote, seeks to make gender, and this is their own words, seeks to make gender identity a permanent fixture in the school environment. The toolkit offers sample instruction plans, curriculum plans for how the school can work this ideology into the school. So I want to make it really, really clear what January and her husband and child experienced. Frank, it's not a one-off. It's emblematic of a modus operandi of activists with millions of dollars behind them, in insinuating themselves into schools, into school boards and influencing them, and then deliberately seeking to cut off the influence of parents and the knowledge of parents so that they can access our impressionable young minds, our kids, to be able to accept this ideology unquestioningly and then themselves begin to act it out in their own denial of their sex.
You know, it is a sweeping problem across the country, and we have a couple of minutes here. We got about 2 more minutes, and you guys have a resource, and January, I want to come to you on this resource. Tell us about it, and also what legislation, what efforts are you working towards now? Because I know both of you are highly engaged on this issue. So January, tell us about the resource and some of the efforts that are underway.
Absolutely, Billy. And so I just want to add one more detail that people may not know. The violation with our daughter happened in the fall of 2020. We did not file the federal lawsuit until October 2021. I want to make it very clear to your audience that we tried very hard to resolve this issue with the school district. Filing a lawsuit was never even, on our mind when this first happened. But it became very clear that the school district was not going to stop. And so with that being said, we do have an amazing resource that both Bernadette and I co-authored along with another pastor and a couple of other people called the Church Transgender Response Guide. You can download a digital copy or order a hard copy at childparentrights.org. And it's really a resource not just for pastors, but for parents. In this guide, it's everything from what is being taught in school, how it's being taught in school, how to protect and safeguard your children from this ideology itself. I have I wrote a chapter on how to parent your child through this confusion. There are alternatives in here, even legal advice for churches, because oftentimes they don't even know what their rights are. And then Bernadette wrote a very, very important chapter in here about child protective services and what to do if CPS comes to your door, because she can speak to the fact that children are being removed from loving parents for simply not going along with the denial of the sex of their child. In our case, one of the reasons why this is so egregious, Billy, with these social transitions is this is not a benign or neutral act. This is a psychosocial medical intervention, and it's the first step toward the medical intervention pathway. So when I learned where this was leading my daughter, that they were performing double mastectomies on girls as young as 12 years old, most parents are absolutely horrified and fearful about the future for their child. They are sterilizing vulnerable children like my daughter that cannot possibly consent to this. So this resource is a wonderful resource for parents and pastors, not only to understand what's happening, to protect your children, because we must be inoculating these children as we are changing the culture. This ideology has infiltrated every institution, every aspect of our culture, even our children's programming, as you've reported on many times, Billy. So it's really, really important that parents teach their children the truth, ground them in the truth that they are made male or female, sex is binary, and regardless of what one does to their physical self, that can never change.
And I wanted to quickly add that we've also created a whole training module, a full day training for churches in order to be able to access, to take this information, because it's dense, it's 99 pages, and to be able to then institute it within their church bodies, their congregations. And we offer that training. I know there's a visual or a graphic that's going to be displayed here that people can go on and access these resources and this training, because it is not simply about children, as important as that is. It really, this agenda is seeking to change our fundamental understanding of the human species. It is altering what is ultimate truth, and it's forcing language and a belief system upon us throughout the culture that is contrary to knowledge, to truth, and certainly to the Christian faith. And so we encourage people to avail themselves of this resource.
And
Well, I
Billy, I
want to
have a
thank
message for pastors. You know, a lot of parents that I speak to, especially Christian parents, completely feel abandoned by their church. So if pastors are not engaging their congregation on this issue, especially children's ministry and youth pastors, they are failing the children and the parents in their congregation. If the church is not willing to stand in the gap and protect the children from this evil ideology, what hope do we have?
That's right.
Well, I want to thank you both so much for taking the time. Really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you for
We're
having us, Billy.